Welcome to Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace. I'm your host, Chester Stanley, and I'm delighted to have in the studio Mr. Stan Shaw. Stan, it's great to have you with us and on Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace.
Yeah, and it's great to be here too, Chester.
Very good.
I'd like to thank you for that.
It's a pleasure to have you, Stan, and as we've shared telephone conversations, you've got a great story. I mean, you're a good Aussie man, and you've seen a lot of life, and it's an incredible story of God's amazing grace. So we want to explore that in this program. So look, Stan, why don't we go right back and tell us where you were born and who brought you up and what happened when you were a young person?
Right. I was born in Croydon, in New South Wales, yep.
Yes. In
Sydney, by my grandmother.
By your grandmother?
Yeah. Mum had to give me up when I was 4.
Okay.
Because my father was he's a career criminal.
Okay.
And spent too much time in jail. And in his later years, he became a bank robber.
Is that a fact?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only way that he could get by, according to him.
Yes, yes.
But,
okay.
Yeah, and I got sent to live with her.
But the authorities wouldn't let your mum keep you any longer? Or?
No, that was okay. Mum just couldn't cope. There was no social welfare net in those days. So
yes, for sure.
Just purely and simply make do or get rid of the kid.
Yes, okay.
So I drew the short straw.
You drew the short straw. Okay, and so you went to live with your grandmother at the age of? 4. 4, and you lived with her for how long?
10 years.
For 10 years till you're 14 years of age.
Yeah.
You saw your mum during that time?
Occasionally. Sometimes. Not a lot. No.
So Stan, what do you mean by you drew the short straw?
Well, at that stage, Mum had 2 children, myself and a younger sister. And of course, like any good mother, she elected to keep the baby. And I had to go. So I went to live with my grandmother, who was a very great lady, spent a lot of time and effort to give me everything I needed, but she come from a very, very hard background of living off the land. And when she wanted something done, she wanted it done. And if you didn't do it, you copped it. And I used to get, when I say beaten, not immersively, but I used to get beaten. And while she was hitting me, if I happened to go down, she'd lay the boot in.
Okay.
And at that time, she'd be telling me God hated me and he hated anyone that did things wrong. So that was
a helpful start.
It was a helpful start, good introduction to religion, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that was that. I lived there for about 10 years, and then I went to live with Mum eventually, after 10 years when I was 14 years old, and I went to live at Liverpool in southwest Sydney. There, being left to my own devices and coming from a very sheltered background, I soon learned how to get into trouble, I guess. I met up with some very unsavoury characters, mainly at the high school. The high school I went to, you had to carry a knife, or you didn't bother going to school. I got mixed up in some gangs, and what we used to do at that time would either just get into strife, borrow other people's cars, and mainly borrow as in borrow, and fight the army.
And fight the army?
The army, yeah.
What do you mean by fight the army?
Well, it was an army town. There was 2 big army camps at Liverpool, and you'd go down to the pubs there, and the soldiers always reckoned they were better than everyone else, and of course someone had to prove it.
Yes.
So it used to be on for young and old. But,
did you think they were good at fighting?
No. I feared that if ever Australia had to go to war, we're in trouble. I reckon they should have sent the gangs.
Okay.
Don't send the soldiers.
Right.
But I started to get sick of it. I got really fed up of that sort of life, being chased all the time, just getting into strife for the sake of nothing better to do.
Did the police ever catch you at all? Or?
Yeah. A mate and I got run in one night. They fractured his skull with a torch, and they gave me a pretty good hiding. And then they turned me loose at 6 o'clock the next morning and said, walk home. I could hardly limp.
Is that a fact?
Let alone walk,
Amazing.
Yep. So, but I met a girl through a woman I work with, and she took me home and introduced me to her daughter, and that was a turning point. It got me out of there. got me away from the gangs and the trouble, and sort of gave me a new focus. And her father gave me a job as an apprentice carpenter, which was absolutely fabulous, really. And that went on for a while, and then when I parted company with the young lady, they parted company with me, as far as the carpentry went,
Yes, okay.
as it goes. But eventually I went to work for a drug company, and it was while I was working for that company that I met my wife. And she was a great influence. She's a really, really fabulous girl. And we got married and we settled and we had a son. But then I was still at that point where I was just jaded. I was fed up of everything that was going on around me. And we had some friends that were working in Port Hedland in Western Australia.
Just before we go to Port Hedland, Stan, you did mention to us about you did some taxi driving in Sydney.
I did.
Was that a good experience?
Yes and no. I drove taxis in King's Cross in Sydney's red light district. Spent many a night shift there, and there was a lot of troops coming in from Vietnam on R&R at that time. And I probably saw how degraded people can become when they're full of grog and pot. And I was really, really getting fed up.
Interesting.
One night I just parked the cab and said, I'm not going to drive that anymore.
Is that so?
Yeah, I just fed up with it.
Yeah.
So some friends came from Port Hedland about that time. And, well, now I'm jumping the gun myself now. They, when I got sick of the cabs, I was actually driving past the ambulance headquarters in Sydney. And I thought, I wouldn't mind doing that job, get a job as an ambulance officer. So I just called in out of the blue and said, you got any jobs? And they said, well, we are looking for men. And they said, would you like to do a driving test now? Why not?
Just like that?
Just like that. So I did the driving test, got inducted. And in the first training school, there was an SDA, Seventh-day Adventist instructor. And probably the first inklings of, you know, maybe there was something a bit better.
Okay.
He was a fine man and he conducted himself extremely well. And I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to men like that. But again, with the ambulance service, I got fed up of just watching people being bad.
Being bad?
Yeah, at the jobs, and the alcohol and the crashes, cutting people out, you know, spending all night at wrecks, just hacking bodies out of cars. Started to get a bit fed up of that, and then these friends did come from Port Hedland and they said, look, why don't you come back with us, just for the adventure? And I was jaded enough to say, yeah, let's do it. So we packed up and went.
Went to Port Hedland?
Yeah, and out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, well, some of those Western Australian mining towns don't have a reputation for being particularly virtuous, calm places.
No, it was a bit like Dodge City.
A bit like Dodge City?
A bit sort of, yeah.
Okay. We'll pause right there, Stan. We just need to go to a break, and I'm sure you're enjoying Stan's journey, and stay right with us and we'll be back. Welcome back to Amazing Stories, Amazing Grace, and with Stan Shaw. Stan, it's been an interesting journey so far, fairly disillusioned with human nature, fairly disillusioned with corruption that you've seen right along in so many ways. You're invited to go to Port Hedland, and you made the point before the break, it was like going from the frying pan into the fire. What do you mean by that?
Well, when I got up there, I suddenly realised it was worse than what I'd come from.
Okay, right.
You know, it's one of those towns that it just absolutely operates on booze.
Is that so?
If you don't drink, you're out.
Yeah.
And I used to drink a bit, but not to excess. But I saw drinking up there and human behaviour that I'd never seen. Even in King's Cross.
Even in King's
Yeah,
Cross.
they brought it to new heights. They put new levels on it. And I was working for a mining company at the time, and they were a pretty rough, tough bunch. When I got made leading hand of my shift, they trotted out this huge Macedonian that I had to fight to prove that I could be leading hand.
You're joking?
Yep. If I hadn't fought him, didn't matter if he won or lost, But if
you had to fight.
You had to fight him. And if you fought him, you're right, they'd take your orders. If you didn't, you wouldn't go back. But I was getting fast fed up of that too. I'd really, you know, I was starting to really think there's got to be more to life than what I'm looking at. There's got to be something here. And I had the opportunity at that time to join the ambulance service up there because I'd been volunteering, just mainly to keep the skills up, I guess. And then they needed another officer, so rather than spend a lot of money, they said, we've got a guy here that's completely trained.
For sure.
Would you like a job? And I took it. But same old, same old. Same jobs, same problems, you know. I enjoyed helping people. That was one thing that I really did enjoy. But a lot of the people that you helped were just, had put themselves in that position. They weren't what you'd call accidents, you know. So, and then one Saturday, I was on duty in the ambulance station, and I just had an urge to read. Were
you a great reader, Stan?
No. Zane Grey Westerns was the limit.
Your reading.
Yeah,
yes, okay.
And they're quite knowledgeable in their own way. But yeah, so I had an urge, and at that time there was about 5,000 paperback books on shelves in the ambulance station. It was like the town book exchange.
Yes, okay.
So if you brought in a book, you could take a book.
Yep.
And that was it. And I went through these things. I searched and I searched, and I just couldn't be bothered. So Sunday morning, and it was an unbelievably quiet weekend as far as the job was concerned. Sunday morning, the urge was worse. I had to read something. I just really had to get my hands on a book. Couldn't explain it. I thought, I'll go through them again. Let's see what we can find here. And I eventually found a little paperback, and it was called The Great Controversy.
Okay.
By E.G. White. Never heard of the book or her.
Yes.
Wouldn't have had a clue.
Yes.
But I started thumbing through it, and at that time, because I had such a dislike for religion, I really disliked it. It seemed to me as though in some cases it was getting stuck into religion.
If I can pause there, Stan. Why this strong antagonism to religion?
I think the main thing was I'd always felt they were after your money.
Okay.
And the other thing was just the hypocritical life of Christians who weren't living what they claimed.
Yep.
That was a real problem. Yep. To me, you walk the talk.
So there's this really strong opposition to religion.
Oh, I hated it.
You hated it?
Sometimes when people from religious denominations would come calling, I'd put the hose on them.
Would you really?
Yeah. Yeah. Or stick the dog onto them.
Okay.
Just to watch them jump the front fence. It was just a source of amusement to me.
Amazing.
I had no time for religion whatsoever.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yep. So I picked this book up and I thought, well, if it's getting stuck into Christianity, it might be just worth a look. So I started to read it, and it started to put into perspective what I was actually running away from. I never knew it as sin.
Yes.
I was just sick of sin. But of course, I learnt too by reading the book, there's nowhere on planet Earth I can escape from it.
Yes, yes.
But during the reading of it, God started to become real.
Amazing.
I actually saw there was a God, that he was good for his word. And if you could challenge him and take up his cause, things could happen. So I started to try and change my life, as you do when you read these things. The first thing that went out the window was the grog. That cost us just about all our friends. They just didn't want to know us.
Amazing, isn't it, how that happens? Yeah.
At the hospital, I actually overheard a conversation one day, and there were some nurses in an office talking, and as I walked past, they didn't know I was there. One of them said, she said, have you heard about Stan? And the other one said, no, I haven't. And she said, he's got religion, he's gone queer.
Is that so?
Yeah, and I just went to hysterics. I could actually laugh at it at that stage.
Yes.
Because I was now beginning to realise that there was two things on this world. One was religion and one was Christianity.
Yes.
And Christianity was the one that I wanted. Anyone can be religious. That's not what counts.
Amazing. When you read this book, did it take you long? I mean, it's a thick book.
It's a thick book. I think I read it that shift and the next.
That shift and the next?
Yep. Straight through it.
I mean, there must be 400 or 500 pages in this. That's my recollection.
I just could not put it down.
And so this is all the way from these westerns and to this heavy
And it was, yeah, people say to me it's such a heavy book, and I say it's not. To me, it just isn't. I absolutely love it.
Just an interesting introduction to Christianity, I suppose.
Yeah, I still didn't know who the author was.
Yes.
But
yes.
The wife and I took part in an activities program for the children one school holidays, and the wife was involved helping, and I took the ambulance down just to... We used to like to show the children so that if the ambulance turned up, they wouldn't be afraid. You know, just so that they'd be happy getting in the thing, you know. And we got dressed and left for this party at the end of it, but I just didn't want to go. I was so fed up of parties and booze and bad behaviour. I said to Sandra, my wife, I just don't want to go. So we turned the car around and started to drive back home.
Is that so?
Halfway home, I said, I've got to go back. And I said, this sounds crazy. And I said, I don't even know why. I have to drive back. And I went to the party, and I was putting up with it. And anyway, eventually I overheard a young woman talking to he was a pretty hippie-looking guy, about religion, and I didn't want to eavesdrop, so I just went over and I said, look, do you mind if I listen in?
Okay, Stan will pause right there because we need to go for a break. I'm sure you're enjoying Stan's journey, and stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace, and we're with Stan Shaw. Stan, this is a real wonderful Aussie story of God's grace. Your wife during this time, you read all these Western books, suddenly you're reading this book on the controversy between good and evil, you've given away alcohol. How did your wife relate to all that?
She was very suspicious.
Suspicious?
Yeah, because she knew how much I hated religion.
Yes.
And she had been raised in a certain denomination, and I used to give her a real caning over the years about it.
Okay.
So she was basically waiting for the punchline. She thought I was up to something.
Did she?
Yeah. She thought there was just going to be one big joke at the end, and she was going to be the butt of it. So I had a bit of trouble convincing her that I was fair dinkum.
I'm sure.
But
I'm sure.
yeah, eventually she got with the program.
Okay.
She came along.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. So let's go back. You go to this party. Didn't want to go. God's Spirit's prompting you. Go back. You go to it. You met somebody. You heard somebody talk about religion. Yeah, and
I didn't know her. When she'd finished talking to the guy, I said, look, I've just read a book that I'm excited about. It's called The Great Controversy by E.G. White. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
And she just gave a wry little smile and said, would you like a book by the same author? And I said, I would love it. So she got that round to the house very quick. And I read that, and even though The Great Controversy had put everything into perspective, the Desire of Ages, when I realised that Jesus had died in my place and he'd copped everything that I deserved, that was the end of it. I just accepted him as my Lord and Saviour that moment.
So it really touched your heart, that book?
There was nowhere else to go.
Yeah,
you know,
wonderful.
I just had to do that.
Yeah.
Because when I finished that, I thought I've got to know more.
Yes.
I didn't own a Bible. And the Great Controversy, all throughout it, the author kept saying, check my book by the Bible. I hunted all over town. Couldn't find one, and they thought I was mad for asking. But I eventually rounded one up and started to check what was written, lined up. So that was great. But after a while, I wanted more books, and I knew the street that this young lady lived in, but I didn't know the house. So I wasn't really into praying, but I just said, look, I said, God, if you're there and you're fair dinkum, I can't see why you can't show me where she lives.
Okay.
So I got in the car and went round to the street, and I just knew exactly which driveway to drive up.
Is that a fact?
Yep. And I knocked on the door, and she looked at me, and she said, what are you doing here? You know, and I said, I want more books. I've got to have more books. And she said, how'd you find out where I lived? I said, I asked God, and he told me.
What was the reaction to that, Stan?
Oh, she was just stunned. So she referred me off then to the local pastor because she was getting worried, I think, that she might fluff it and lose one, you know. So, yeah, but the interesting thing was we eventually left Port Hedland and went to Perth. And we moved to Perth in camp time.
Okay.
The camp was on, and this was real strange to me. I mean, all these people in tents, I thought, you know, there's something illegal going on here. I'd just never seen it. But anyway, we stuck with it.
Yeah. Had you commenced Bible studies in Port Hedland with the local Adventist pastor?
Yeah, I had.
And had your wife joined you in those studies?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Okay, so she came on board.
But at this stage, the smoking was the big problem.
Heavy smoker?
Yep. Oh, 60 a day. And they wanted me to get baptised, and of course I couldn't get rid of the fags. So they started a 5-day plan to stop smoking at the camp. We went along. Sandra was great.
Because she used to smoke too.
Yep. But I was hopeless.
Yes.
And have you ever tried to sneak a smoke
at a camp?
At an Adventist camp meeting? Every time I lit up, someone turned up, and I'm there trying to get rid of the smoke. So I was that disgusted one day, and I thought, I've got to go up the road and get some smokes, or I'll rip this tent down. But my wife had hidden my car keys.
Yes.
So I just, again, I was that distraught. I just got on my knees and I said, look, if you're fair income, you're there.
Yes.
I said, you can take away the craving for cigarettes.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just not who you say you are.
Yes.
And I stood up, and I was never smoked. It was gone.
From that moment?
It was gone.
Praise the Lord. That's
I never wanted another cigarette.
That's amazing. From 60 a day?
Yep. They'd hidden me car keys. They did everything they could do to foil me, but it just...
at the end of the day, it was God's...
It was God that did it, absolutely and utterly.
Yes.
And I've never touched one to this day.
That's fantastic. That's wonderful.
Haven't had to.
So, Stan, you've given up tobacco. There was no reason why you shouldn't be baptised now.
That's right. And we were.
Whereabouts?
Bickley Church in Western Australia, in Perth.
Yes.
Yep, we got baptised there, the wife and I.
Pretty special day.
It was, and actually the pastor, Lou Parker, who was the pastor in Port Hedland, he flew down
for the
to baptise us.
Okay.
Because at that time the pastor there had a plane supplied by the church.
Yes.
Because the parish was enormous, you know, it was absolutely huge. So yeah, we did that. But God has really, really, and when I look back, I just saw that I was sin sick.
Yes.
Just so fed up. But I now realise that no matter how bad the sin gets, there's an end to it. I read the end of the book, we win.
Yes, praise the Lord.
Yeah,
exactly. So Stan, how many years ago was that when you were baptised?
I was baptised in 1978, so 30 years ago.
30 years ago. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, fantastic. And you now live here in Queensland.
Yes.
You're a deacon at your local church, head deacon at your local church, and these last 30-odd years, good decisions you made in terms of accepting Jesus and finding truth?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, once you really, really grab hold of who Jesus is and what he did and what he's going to do, there's no greater adventure.
Yes, for sure.
And now I'm on a mission from God.
Yeah, wonderful.
You know, and I've joined the crazies. I used to honestly think that, you know, people that were religious definitely had they had some brain cells missing, you know.
Amazing.
But now I've got the same ones missing.
But so you lost a whole lot of friends in Port Hedland, but you've obviously gained a whole lot of friends as well.
No, we lost them all up there. If you didn't drink, they were very, very suspicious. They just didn't want to know you. Something wrong with a man that didn't drink. But I found out Jesus didn't have to do any of those things, and he was the greatest man that ever walked.
Yes, for sure.
So he's my example.
Exactly. Yeah. And your satisfaction with being an Adventist Christian, do you like the package?
Yeah. This is the church that God led me into.
Yes.
Probably would have been the last one that I'd pick.
Yes.
But he's got a sense of humour too, I reckon.
Yes.
But no, it's fabulous. I wouldn't belong anywhere else, and I can't understand people who leave our church and go to other churches.
Yes.
They just haven't got the package.
No.
It's complete.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a complete package.
Fabulous.
Well, thanks very much, Stan. We've really enjoyed your thrilling story, and I know the viewers have too, and we look forward to seeing you next time.